There we go. We're live now. Okay. So, good morning, everybody. Here's Caroline Henry again from Auvillers in Champagne. And today I'm with my good friend Tom, who is a champagne specialist and an English sparkling specialist. And I thought it would be really interesting to compare champagne and English sparkling on several criteria to see if champagne really is, or English sparkling really is the wannabe champagne, as Don said in the last video. So, Tom, tell
Yeah.
us, how would you introduce English sparkling?
Yeah, well, it's a really still quite a recent phenomenon in the sense that actually I looked at some statistics today, and 1/5 of England's vineyard that's under vine at the moment is still yet to produce. But
Okay.
it's grown an extraordinary amount. It really started in the mid to late 90s. People started realizing that you could grow Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier here and ripen them for sparkling wine. And obviously, the climate has continued to get more favorable over that time. So it started as a tiny thing. England has been growing vines. There was a kind of renaissance in the second half of the 20th century, but mostly with cool climate German hybrids, resilient vines and making still wines.
Mhm.
And the idea of bottle fermented sparkling wine, really, I mean, we're talking about pretty much a 20-year history of people trying to do it on any scale seriously now.
Okay.
But it has, it's grown immensely. Some people worry it's grown too much recently, but England now has got about just under 5,000 hectares under vine, not all of
Okay.
which is for sparkling wine. Figure sort of hovers around 70%. So in essence, not all of that, as I say, is under production, but we're kind of looking like, in terms of the planted area, around about the 10th of the size of Champagne now for
Okay.
sparkling wines. So it's getting about the size of the Côte d'Ivoire or something. It's getting to
Okay,
be.
the Côte d'Ivoire is responsible for 27% of the
Yeah,
champagne appellation.
yeah.
So it's uh but that is quite interesting. So it's grown significantly, um and in a way that could make sense, because if you look at the sparkling wine figures of the world, we know that the sparkling wine market tripled since the beginning of the century. So
Yeah.
25 years ago, 26 if you want. So obviously, that would make sense. You said they grow Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Meunier.
Yeah.
Do they use any of the hybrids? Use, here in Champagne, we have obviously Voltis, and now we have
Mm.
Oralis and Ceralis that they're going to test. So we are bringing in hybrids. The UK already had hybrids. Are they
We have
using them or not?
older generations of hybrids. So there's one grape variety called Céval Blanc, which
Mhm.
is not allowed for quality, wasn't allowed for quality wine. It's basically, almost banned in France, I believe. But actually, there have been some pretty decent wines made with it. It's very, resistant, traditionally appreciated. But really, those varieties, apart from one called Bacchus, which is used for still wine, which is actually it's counted, I believe, as a vinifera vine now. Um,
Okay.
apart from that, the direction of travel is very much Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Meunier, and a bit of Pinot Blanc, bit of Pinot Gris, which do get into the sparkling sometimes. But really, yeah, it's a champagne model is what people have.
Okay. Okay. So it could be a wannabe champagne, and that in
I
that way that you
I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a
I don't
problem
know.
with me.
It's like
No,
I said, it's not, I cannot take credit for this
yeah,
uh for this way of labeling English sparkling.
yeah,
I asked you this before, but I was saying in the beginning British sparkling, because if memory serves me well, there's Welsh sparkling. But I think it's not called British sparkling, even though the rest of everything is Britain, if I understand.
basically, traditionally British wine was actually like bulk imported wine, bottled,
Okay.
and you could call it British wine. So, I mean, in reality, in England, the
Oh, so
vast,
it's like Vin de France.
not exactly. It was actually bulk bottled. Could be foreign
Okay.
wine, whereas English wine, there is a PDO for it, English sparkling wine as well.
Okay, okay.
So and it's almost all in the southern counties of England, from Kent and Essex in the
Mhm.
east down to, I mean, yeah, it goes down to Cornwall, but um,
Okay.
majority is Hampshire, Dorset is the kind of finishing point on the west. So, all along the south coast and up into increasingly more into the kind of Oxfordshire and Chilterns area. So, and there are vineyards as far, into Yorkshire and going up north as well. But obviously, as you go,
Into Yorkshire. Okay. All
well,
right. So,
that's, yeah,
so how are they planted, these vineyards? Are they planted according to the dense system that we have here in Champagne, which is now, or they are pushing at least to change part of it to VSL? So Vignes Semilarge, which is basically 2 meter interval
yeah.
between rows, or is it planted like everywhere else in the world, which is like between 2 and 2.5 meters, instead of 1 meter to 1 meter 10 in Champagne?
Basically, we're pretty much VSL here. I mean, most of the vineyards. There's a lot of reasons for it, but I mean, essentially,
Mhm.
you're usually seeing 1.8, 2 meter rows, right down
Okay.
4,000, 4,500. It depends. There's many reasons for it, but essentially, you've got to remember that, not being a historical vine growing nation,
Mhm.
kind of the whole machinery and the practical side of growing, 8,000, growing dense, having enjambeurs and tractors and these things. We come from like an orchard culture basically. So
Mhm.
the initial vineyard sort of movement was really kind of adapting orchard type practices to vines, and even planting in often old orchards, in places that grew fruit well,
Mhm.
apple, pears and things. We don't really, because we're a bit further north as well. I mean, a few people have tried planting in the Champenois density and the height and things, but it doesn't always work super well here because
Mhm.
we need a little bit more canopy. Often we need to capture a bit
Yeah.
more light, and that means wider rows. We go a bit further.
And so also lower yields then?
Yeah, so yields here are the number one headache really for English growers is the fact that, not only obviously we're at lower density than Champagne, but for climatic reasons, our yields are low, and they're kind of the limiting factor, really. That's the number one thing. If you're a vineyard manager in England, one of your major jobs is to get your vineyard to produce a commercial yield, because the things have improved a lot and people have improved their ways of working. But it's I know one of the major producers here sort of based its business model on like 5 tons a hectare as what
Okay.
they would be. They need to make their business work on 5 tons a hectare.
So
So,
5 tons a hectare, so they are actually higher than they are in Cava Corpinat. In Corpinat, they're only at 4 tons a hectare.
well, during the droughts, yeah, they can be.
But,
They can,
Corpinat, even not during the drought, like
uh,
they are four and
but
a half, they have like a fantastic year, basically.
but that's again, I mean, the density you have to take into account
Mm,
when you're looking at bush vines
yeah,
in
they've
in
planted most of them bush again.
in drought, in dry conditions as well. And it's a very different calculation. I think when you look at yield figures, you really have to understand the difference between the planting systems because it's so different. And in England, the truth is, a lot of people get good yields in England as well. But the idea of getting 12 tons a hectare out of a system like that is bonkers. I mean, it
Mhm.
can occasionally happen, and I've heard of people, 18 and things getting very high yields. But the truth is, most time people are kind of, I think, between 5 and 8. Um,
Yeah,
Mine lower often for quality still
those
is a growth.
those figures are in line with New Zealand. When I wrote the article on VSL, I'd seen the figures here, but I couldn't talk about them. So I spoke to the vineyard manager at Hunters, they've been making sparkling wine for a long time in New Zealand, and they basically said that it was very rare to get 10,000 kilograms per hectare. That it generally is between 5.5, 6, and 8. So with irrigation. So
We don't.
so that was I guess you don't need irrigation in England.
Well, no,
Oh,
normally
maybe,
There have been, so there are some vineyards in Essex. So I mean, what
Okay.
interesting thing about England is if you think about it, I mean, Champagne, you can drive from one side of Champagne to the other in a couple of hours. It's a big region, but in England, the distance between the east, proper East
Hmm.
Kent, Essex, and Dorset is
Yes.
is a lot. It's a long way, and it's a very different climate. So we do have some very wet parts of the country, but actually in the east, we have parts of the country that are not only much drier than Champagne, but are almost semi-arid. I mean, some of the rainfall figures that you see in Essex are pretty comparable to what you see in Penedès in Catalonia.
Okay.
So we're talking yeah, they have had I've seen drought stress in Essex in the last few years. Arid conditions, very they do stress out about rainfall sometimes because
Okay.
the east of the country tends to get very, very dry. So it's not just a case that, we all joke about the weather in England and we all carry our umbrellas and everything. But actually, these days, it's not a simple case of it's always too wet here. I mean, we have had some problems, definitely not as bad as Champagne in general, but 2022,
So
2023.
it is very much like here in Champagne, where some areas, basically everything that's not on chalk has been higher impacted, or worse impacted by the climate change. For instance, um, there's been more issues with drought in the Orb on clay soils, in the N on clay soils, than there has been around here. My village, we seem to have the rainfall when we need, protected by Dom Perignon, obviously. Uh, but it's it is you can see, even here I can see sometimes the rain on the other side of the river, whilst it's not here. Or you know they have more sunshine, different things. So it's the same in England. So some areas
Funny
are
question.
uh, could do potentially, because the idea of irrigation has been flaunted here in Champagne. Maxime Toubart told me on the record, uh, when I wrote about VSL, when I told him that he probably would need irrigation, he said, "Yes, we know we will change the cahier des charges to put irrigation, because they were irrigating at that time in Alsace, I think. I don't know, which is same region as we are." Obviously, today we're not talking so much about that, because to have irrigation, you need to get the water from somewhere. That's the first part. Yeah.
Well, we have plenty of that in general. I think so yes, you said at the beginning, a lot of people say England has the same soils of Champagne. Well, the truth is basically, if you look at the old Paris basin that where in Champagne, I'm going to do this the right way round. You have the sort of chalk outcropping around
Hmm.
Champagne, then dips under the English Channel, and it comes back. We kind of basically have the top of the bowl in
Hmm.
running the southeast of UK, roughly from Kent down into sort of Dorset, Hampshire. So
Hmm.
we do get basically some very similar soils, but that's only part of the story because the funny thing about the UK is the traditional fruit growing areas that ripened best
Hmm.
were not on the chalk downlands. You come to the UK,
Okay.
you don't see chalk downland is arable land. It's sheep,
Yeah.
it's bare, it's windy, it's exposed, it's a bit cooler in general. So it was not when vineyards started in the UK, they didn't go, oh, we've got chalk, we're going to plant there. They put
Okay.
the fruit growing areas of the UK are the lower down sheltered areas. And it's only really again recently that people with the climate change have felt the confidence to go up a bit
Mhm.
more the chalk. So in terms of what that does for English wine, we're still pretty early days. I mean, the first kind of producers doing it really started planting in any great level, 20 years ago, perhaps. But there's still a lot of very young vineyards, and whether it's a very different calculation in England. Just
Mhm.
because it's a very site. We're that much further north.
Mhm.
Ripening is often fine, but it's not assured here. It's still a very marginal climate. So
Mhm.
you drop your degrees a little bit when you go up. It gets a bit colder, gets a bit windier, gets a bit later to ripen. So that has a huge effect on the wines as well. And it's not, it's even on paper, it looks quite similar to Champagne. It's not that change in climate, just going a bit further north, kind of
Yeah.
jumbled up all the calculations a little bit, and I think we're still really learning so much
I
about.
think I think also being so much closer to the sea.
Yeah,
Because
it's
no matter where you would be, because you speak about the
mm,
southern parts of the UK, you would be a lot closer to the ocean than we are here. Um,
absolutely, and we basically are. You can get too close in the UK, I think most people think, because there are some vineyards that are very close to the sea, and you never get the daytime temperatures really. You lower your frost risk, but most people kind of are heading inland. Once you head inland 5-10 miles, you
okay.
away from the sea breeze. And there are some. I mean, what we're seeing in England in the last few years, I'd say since 2018, but in vintages like 2020, 2022, people 20 years ago, 30 years ago, would never have believed that we could ripen Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in the way that we are now. And there's been a lot behind that, but it is remarkable and it is exciting.
It may actually even get better because I went to um, a conference on climate change in Champagne and how it could impact basically the region and also, the touristy area. I'm
Mm,
sorry, Pixie's making noise here. Uh, the joys of having a
mm,
dog. And it was very interesting because they actually predicted with the different scenarios of the GIEC, they predicted that temperatures would rise by 1.3, 1.4, the average temperature here in the growing season, not necessarily there. They were saying temperatures would rise in winter. What issues that would give, because obviously we are seeing this already. We had cold weather this year in December, through to the beginning of January. We had snow, but having been here now more than 14 years, I can see the difference in winters.
mm.
Still not used to them, but they seem to be milder, in a way. And we can see the effects in the vineyard because all the diseases, the bacterias, all of that is not killed because we just do not have enough cold. So that obviously, if winters get a little bit milder, that obviously will be exasperated. The other thing is that the heat peaks obviously will be in the middle of the growing season, or at the end of the growing season, so July, August, and that we will have more issues with drought. There were all these different things that they were saying. They said that the press or the model they used said that the precipitation would not change, the amount of water that would come would not change that much. But
Mm,
the way the water falls, I think a bit like you see in the US,
yeah,
would be very different. So,
yeah.
we would still have the same amount of average water on the appellation, but it may not fall everywhere. When it falls, it will come down heavily. It will cause erosion, all the different things that
Exactly what
that
they've.
we know. So if this is negatively impacting Champagne because we are further south, they said our climate by 2035, 2040, you must remember we're 26, so it's not that far away, okay, could be similar to what we have in Toulouse today.
Yeah,
So that's a significant difference, okay? Uh, but that basically means that maybe in the UK, you would have a climate more than we have here today. I don't know. Have
I
you seen any studies or anything on that?
there have been some. Yes, I think. I mean, I think that the general picture is not that things just move up.
Yeah.
So the problem we have, I mean, we are much largely more oceanic, and we do get hit with pretty big weather systems, and we don't have as cold winters. The number of times that I
Yeah.
go to Champagne a lot in the winter, it's always colder in Champagne than it is in London. Pretty much, during the winter months. Actually, we are pretty mild. I can't even remember seeing like big snowfall here. But yes, the most of the studies I've seen a couple are really due to the variability that we're going to see in the UK. So it's we do get more warmth than we've ever had. Our growing degree days in the east are quite similar to with Burgundy 20,
Mhm.
30 years. And but we're quite susceptible to blocked patterns where we get cold wind coming down from the
Okay.
northeast. and we've seen that in a few seasons. And the problem here is in year like 2021, 2024, we're later here.
Yeah.
So we're often harvesting about a month later than Champagne.
Okay.
The season starts a bit later, but it's just a bit slower. Everything's slower. We're flowering in a good season in the first half of June, middle of June, but often we're not seeing veraison in the vineyards, until mid-August and into September sometimes. And in late years, really hanging on. People are the grapes harvested in November, just in 2024. We've seen grapes
In
harvested.
24, okay. Because November used to be like, uh, I have known grapes harvested end of October, November in 2013 when I was here.
Yeah.
So I arrived in 11, at the end, the very end of 11.
Mm.
So, and I know that if you look through the archives, for instance, you see that there regularly were harvests end of October, beginning of November.
Yeah.
But obviously, then if you look, depending on how far you look back in the archives, there's been ups and downs, which helps the climate deniers say that we have climate change. They say, "Ooh, it's just a pattern." Tom, I would like to ask you about in VSL, you normally need less pesticides because you have less plants. Therefore, you need less pesticides than in a dense system. Can you talk to me about my favorite subject,
Oh, yes.
the herbicide usage? Hopefully, it's not as bad as here, and also the pesticides because I think maybe you need, if you get, well, depending on if you get more rain, more moisture, more humidity, you may be more at risk, and you may need to treat more, and maybe you treat with alternatives. I don't know, anything, I'm interested.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to do if you're going to start comparing regions again is just to understand them in context a little bit. That
Mhm,
when you look at Champagne, you're seeing a landscape that is often around Epinay in the Marne is completely dominated by vineyards. So
mhm,
and in the UK, it's much more. The vineyards are dotted around, here and there, here and there. You don't see blanket landscapes. And also with a less dense system, you have more of your vineyard percentage wise is grass cover. We don't
mhm. Yes.
don't see you did occasionally back in the old days. You did sometimes see, what you'd call nuked vineyards. We don't have that here. But in seeing it in context, I mean, there's lots of different factors. I mean, we often have quite rich soils here,
Mhm,
quite fertile soils. Most vineyard land is old, pasture land or something. Have high amounts of a lot of organic matter, a lot of
mhm,
clays, a lot of soils that are quite actually quite liable to compaction with
mhm.
tractors, particularly plowing down, fruit tractors down the same road, wet ground
Yeah.
all the time. So it's people are I think growers in the UK are very conscious about what they do. And if you're just gonna look at herbicide, well then yes, there is herbicide usage here. And actually a lot of people are trying to reduce it. But I was just looking at a sustainability report from Gusbourne, one of our top
Mhm,
sparkling wine producers, who have they've decided they looked at soil compaction in their own vineyards. So they're in a very warm part of Kent. They ripen grapes beautifully. They're making really good wines, really good vineyards, and vineyard management, great reputation. They took surveys of their whole vineyard in Kent, soil surveys, and decided that the compaction that they were getting when they started working tilling mechanically was just not worth it. And they actually moved on to like a no-till trial on their whole
mhm,
vineyard. And as part of that transition, they're having to use some herbicides. They want to stop using some herbicides and get a permanent cover under the vine that they can cut
okay.
and everything. But they took that decision, and I think that was a decision taken in the right spirit. So it's not always a case that you can just change out of them and get a better result for your vineyard. And obviously in England, champagne, when like you were saying, this crazy thing of you've got these narrow rows and you've got 40 centimeters either side of a vine you're allowed to spray. and then you get
Don't worry, they don't measure. They don't measure. I've got it in writing.
then you get the Mohican in the middle. In the UK, if you use herbicide a few times a year, and obviously we have the same limits, we have the same rules, basically. Even I think they're the same. Someone might correct me on that, but since we left the EU,
The 40 centimeters is not an EU rule. It is.
no, no, no. I mean the limits for like I say, application per year per hectare.
Oh,
Like,
well, that is not the application per product is decided per country. It's not decided by the EU will tell you that you can use the
mm,
product and they could put a maximum on it. But
yeah,
for instance, ANSES in France capped it lower. And I think here, one of the reasons, the big issue we have, besides the fact that it looks terrible, is we still have soil compaction. We have
yeah,
huge problems with erosion. We are on slopes, so this has obviously Champagne used to be a lot worse, so this has improved
mm,
over the years. Even me in the 14 years I've seen, that it has improved. Um, but it's, at the same time, the regulations, for instance, like I wrote the other day, basically they put regulations that are not authorized for 94% of the vineyard.
mm,
So basically, you encouraging people to break the law
yes,
because most people don't go look what illegal. You must remember here that in France, they are arguing at the moment that the people selling you the pesticides and the herbicides are also the ones giving you advice on how to use them.
yeah,
So, I mean, a conflict of interest somewhere.
yeah,
So, it's that part. Obviously, grass cover, what you were saying is fantastic if you want to regenerate the soil, which is something that especially houses and some growers here as well have started to do. But the fact that we had grass cover over winter, which we didn't have when I first arrived, by the way, um, really has made a difference with erosion. Like I remember here, Uvilia, you've been to where I live. The post office just up from my house. There's apartments next to it. In 2012, people couldn't get in or out of the apartment because we had a huge storm in July and all the soil had gone off and basically was blocking, because it's down, was blocking the doors. So, we have a real problem of erosion, which I think you will have less if you have bigger vineyards and if you have that grass cover. The
yeah,
pictures, by the way, which went with the article written on the website of the SGV um, to promote the new regulation VSL, basically, you see a tiny bit of herbicides and a huge piece of grass. I think to try and tell people that they need to get into this mentality. But if you write underneath 40 centimeters, people will do, 40 centimeters, that's minimum instead of maximum 40 centimeters. And like you say, you end up with the Mohican, but the Mohican will cause then afterwards erosion again.
yes. If it dies off, and we don't, yeah, our vineyards just look very different. Even if people are
Yeah,
using herbicides, we do have a wet climate. We have rich soils.
yes.
Have some very fast growing um, weed situations, and I think people genuinely try and make the best decision in the main part because we have so many differences with Champagne.
Yeah.
One is we have more estate production. We
Mhm.
have fewer people sort of selling by the kilo, although it's definitely a big part of the industry. We have much more, obviously we don't have this kind of crazy parcelized system,
Yes.
they're in big
I
blocks,
was going to ask you about the blocks.
which is, makes them much more efficient to work and Champagne,
Yes.
and, in terms of carbon, in terms of
Yeah.
petrols. I mean, there's lots that's efficient in the UK. I mean,
And are the vines higher then as well?
yes, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
fruit, like the fruit line, I mean.
Yeah, the fruiting wire is
Yeah.
basically similar to VSL, but I probably
Okay. All right. So it's similar, for instance, that you see in the US or in New Zealand, where I was
yeah,
working for one.
similar. I think the main problem we have is obviously is the yield is quite low and the bottle
Mhm.
of the sparkling wines are quite high, and there's not really a way to bring those down when you're making traditional method wine. So, what we've seen recently is that actually the champagne prices have gone so much higher in the UK, and the English sparkling wine. There was actually a study done by a consultancy in London which showed that the English sparkling wine prices have risen, but not risen nearly as much as champagne has in the last few
Okay.
years. Has benefited English sparkling wine. So, the sales are not really accelerating enough to take on the growth in production that's expected at the
Okay.
moment. But there was I think it was a 3% rise last year when champagne
Yeah,
dipped.
I saw a different study, not the study that you saw, that was talking about the US, France, and the UK, and basically which sparkling beverages, it wasn't just sparkling wine, had done well. And for the UK, they were saying UK was was the only country in the three where Prosecco had like hit
Mm,
its peak, I guess, and was going down a little bit.
yeah.
But they said champagne sales unfortunately went down as well. But they said that it was English sparkling was doing quite well. Um, and Cava and Cremant. I was actually
Sure.
surprised that they had this because I was still under the impression that there wasn't enough Cava and they were restricting it. I was like, okay, so they send it to the UK instead to Germany, but maybe you pay more. I don't know.
We
But
actually do. I think we do actually pay a little bit more. I look at the statistics of this, but we have a bit more of a history of buying slightly more expensive cava here. It's because
yeah,
we like the in-betweeny wines, and that's
yeah,
what, that cava is often fit premium
and I'm
and vintage, good level cava is kind of been a bit more successful here than some of the real, um, you know, uh, maybe.
and and those wines, are they bought on brand? Because the UK market,
Mm,
and I still worked for the Countess a long time ago now. I looked at quite a few studies, and it's a little bit like what we saw with the wine searcher data, is that the wines that were popular or the brands that were popular were the big houses. And so there was this whole myth, that Champagne wants to reinstate
mm,
around those big houses, but
yeah.
there was a lot less about growers. And then obviously some people started to talk about growers because obviously, people love to talk in black and white. So the big house is very bad, growers very good. But we live in a world where everything is gray, like my jersey. So basically that means that there's not, it's not as
Right.
black and white.
Well,
And
England,
obviously I'm the wrong person because when I do come to London, I
yeah,
hang out in the natural wine bars and the natural things. So therefore,
yeah.
sorry.
England is a bit interesting in that respect. In that, I think when a lot of English sparkling wine producers started out, they kind of wanted to copy the champagne houses because
Yes.
they're big names. So the branding, the appearance is quite champagne house like the marketing, and that's
Okay.
still kind of the case. We're having more and more of a kind of grower culture happening, and the funny thing is, we do basically have it. I mean, if you look at Nightimber, I mean, Nightimber
Hmm.
probably the most famous,
Yeah.
English sparkling wine brand really, along with Chapeldown and Gusbourne. Nine Timber is a grower. Nine Timber grow all their own fruit, and they're actually a little bit unusual in that in the sense that Chapeldown doesn't. But Nine Timber have always controlled and bought and controlled all their own vineyards,
Hmm.
and even to that size, which makes them would make them in Champagne a enormous grower, much bigger than any other grower, really. And some other producers as well. The culture has been more to own your vineyards
Yeah.
than buy fruit. It has changed a little bit, and fruit is more bought and sold now, perhaps than it was. Yeah, when I started covering it, I think. But yes, it's been more of a kind of grower culture, and we're seeing more people market their wines talking about their vineyards and being growers now, and the way that the labels are and the way that they appear is a bit
Yeah.
more, it's a bit less champagne housey and trying to make a bit more of a difference.
But when we talk champagne houses today, a lot of them are today talking about the vineyard. And a
Oh,
lot of them are doing, a lot of the progress we see in Champagne today is coming from the houses.
mm,
And, it's for a lot of people very difficult to admit because, we have this idea where, when we talked about the growers, we actually talk about like 100 people that were what I call star growers.
yeah,
Um, and, so they said that everybody was like this, which obviously is not the case because there's like, at one, I think it's 3,600, 3,800
yeah,
growers.
yeah.
So obviously, if you have 100 and there's like a big difference.
That
Um,
number includes
but today houses are making a consistent effort in the vineyard, and obviously they want to take that message away as well. I think because they've realized that consumers are interested in what's happening in the production.
yeah,
We're moving in everything from all our food. We are moving away from completely industrial products to more healthy, authentic products. So they are starting to communicate a little bit more like this. So
yeah,
in the communication, if you look, for instance, you compare champagne communication traditionally, where we talk about celebration, being a superior wine, of course, the wine of kings and the king of wines,
yeah.
and all of that. Is Are there parts of this that the
Yeah.
English sparklings are copying, or have they chosen a completely different strategy?
You have chosen a different strategy and try very much not to look about champagne. And it's quite unfashionable in England. If you start comparing yourself to champagne, I mean, some people have put on, Chapel Down famously went to the streets of Reims last year with relabeling their bottles Chapelle en Bas 2 years ago, and giving them blind to the Remois. And of course, the Roma all preferred Chapel Down over Moet. I think it was they won.
Oh
Um,
my God.
yeah, so cheeky. There's a bit of cheeky marketing. Like Hattingly did a great advert a couple of years ago where they had a couple of old French guys in the cellar going like, "Oh, c'est pas mal. Oh, ouh. Ah, le fruit, oh, c'est super." And then someone walks in and goes, "C'est anglais," and they go, "Ooh." Yeah. Um, we do have a little bit of a cheeky dig at champagne here, and I think that's quite fun. I don't really mind it. Some people get a bit snooty if we start saying, English sparkling wine is
It's
British.
it's very British, and you,
And I don't mind it. Like the average quality, I would say this. I think in champagne we have a very, very wide quality level. You have a lot up here and you have a lot down there. England these days, perhaps it's because it's all new and it's a new industry, and we have it's a bit more restricted. We perhaps haven't, there's no sort of English equivalent to, the real top prestige cuvées yet, but the general level of sparkling wines has increased a lot.
Mhm.
People are doing a really good job. The winemaking has improved a lot, and the average level has gone up a great deal in the last 5 years, I would say, and particularly with some new people coming in. And yeah, I think people are really marketing it, trying to take champagne's market share. They might not admit it, but
They're trying to take. So what about? So obviously, before it was very difficult to get English sparkling outside of the UK. Today, I read that they are exporting as well. There's some in the US. There's a little bit. It's strange because England has traditionally been a wine that imports a
Mm,
market that imports wine from all over the world.
yeah.
So do you think that when it gets exported somewhere else,
Mm,
that it also could chip into that champagne market, but like the one in the middle, obviously not the top, but the one that where, as I famously have said, where the quality did not raise at the same amount as the price. So
I think the challenge is price. Um, and the export was pretty miserable a few years ago. In England, I was just looking up some figures.
Mhm.
I I think it's got up to about 10% by value actually now.
Okay.
Export, yeah, 9% of total sales by no in 2024. which is definitely an improvement. I think that the issue is, it tends to be the case that when people see bottles that look like champagne that aren't champagne, they expect it to be cheaper than champagne. So
Okay.
the trouble with English sparkling wine, if you look at it in America, is basically it's very similarly priced to
Similarly
good
priced. Okay.
champagne. So it's a bit of a challenge to persuade people that not it's not like cava. It's not like a wine that is pretty much always a bit cheaper that you can sell. You can say, hey, this is just as good and it's cheaper. You kind of got to say, hey, this is really interesting as well.
Mhm.
And that's a big challenge for England. And our prices really can't drop
Mhm.
because the levels of production, the yields and the cost of
Yeah.
production, we can't there's no way of making English sparkling wine. People are trying. I'm very cynical about how well you can really do at making 20 euro, 25 euro English sparkling wine. The good ones are all all now in England, £35
Okay.
up.
Yeah. So
Mm,
so they are at similar level as champagne prices.
yeah.
As entry level champagne prices. But that is also the thing that they said here is that, or at least the UMC is saying, the houses are saying that there is very little room for prices to drop because of
Yeah.
production, because of stock. The stock costs a fortune. Do you have a similar issue in the UK? Because obviously,
Mm,
if you want to copy the champagne model, a big part of the champagne model is this huge weight of the stock that
yeah.
stays for a long time.
We
So
don't
you
have
need a lot of money, basically.
Yes, the financing of stock is a big cost and it's gone up a lot. So people have carried a lot of stock, are suddenly paying a lot more to finance it. And it's a challenge, and it's been a challenge behind some of the financial troubles I think that some of the English producers have been in because during the sales slowdown, they've been facing not only a sales slowdown, but in the middle of an expansion of production. So
Yes.
suddenly your stock relative to sales is going up a lot. It's costing you a lot of money. And there have been some quite a few vineyards that have been up for sale recently. It's a difficult moment for England financially in general. I think the producers who have deep pockets will come through it. But we don't have a way of measuring that. We're much looser
Mhm.
regulated industry than champagne. So there's no one, you can't, individual producers might tell you their stock levels, but we don't have like a industry wide one like
Yeah.
champagne. We
But,
don't have industry
I
wide,
think I
measurement.
think I think that there's a advantage and a disadvantage to that. The advantage, like you said, is that individual producers can tell you their stock levels. Here, we don't talk about individual
Mm,
producers. We talk about an average, and it's very complicated because you think, oh, there's a lot of stock, but there are a lot of producers that do not have enough stock, and there are a lot of producers that are swimming in stock and that are, like drowning, basically, not even swimming anymore.
yeah.
So, and you know what? I think this is with everything. When you talk about the average champagne, I'm working on like kind of an article on symbolism and to do with wine tourism,
Mm.
because that's what they discussed apparently at the Champagne Market Trends, where they don't want journalists. The region's small, it's easy to get information. But the thing is that at some point it's very, very difficult. I think Bordeaux had this, Cognac had this, Burgundy diversified, same as the Loire, same as
Yeah,
Alsace. They never really had like this one thing. While here, when you have, like you say, this is what champagne is,
yeah,
and
yeah.
actually you don't have, even me living here for 14 years, I would not be able to tell you what the average champagne is. I don't know if you can tell me what for you the average champagne is, but it just changes. Obviously what the average is here in Ouville is not necessarily the average, even in AE, which is 5 kilometers away from here.
Yeah,
So
champagne.
it's very difficult.
Yeah. And we're much more in the new world model here of, each producer is kind of
Yeah.
doing its own thing, often with its own vineyards, its own financing, its own, they don't
Yes.
have to report that much stuff to their industry bodies. They don't have to, we don't have that much collective information. It's kind of a bit looser, which is kind of good in a way.
Hmm.
Some people have felt like it may have led to the industry expanding too fast, and if we'd had more collective, more control, we would have said, "Oh, hold on, guys, let's slow down the planting a bit or something." But in a way, it's a bit more wild and free out here in England, and I think everyone's basically happy with that. But yes, it does mean we don't have the stats and figures and statistics to the same quality and detail they do in Champagne, even if Champagne's treated as one thing, as you say.
Yeah. No, it's more complicated. So, to finish, I just want to ask you one last question. So that is, as a stellar connoisseur of champagne and the variety and everything we have in there, and obviously also a connoisseur of English sparkling, if you would have to describe the two wines, you would put them next to each other. Imagine you working in a wine store,
Hmm,
and you take whichever brand you want, because I know we don't have averages. But how would you
hmm.
explain the difference to the consumer? Because you were saying that it's difficult for a consumer to understand. For instance, a French consumer, or a South African consumer living in France like me, or an American consumer. How would you describe the difference between them, to put both of them in, have give them the value that they have, not taking away from one to sell the other, if we can. Okay.
I think in general, because of the climate, English wines are just the sparkling wines are a little bit more delicate, a little bit more understated, and a bit fresher. We have less of a system, a culture of reserve wines and
Mhm,
things. So the wines tend to be a little bit more fresh fruit, green, bright fruit, lemony, and delicate. Whereas in Champagne, there's more of a tends to be in the maison, more of a character of a little bit more richness, a little bit more depth. A little bit lower acidity in Champagne. Usually, we have quite higher acidities in England. So I'd say that's kind of the main difference when you're looking at the fruit qualities, which is just really down to a cooler climate here.
yeah, so personal taste. And what would you pair them with? What do we pair English with, and what do we pair
Mm,
champagne with? Your ideal pairing.
yeah. Again, I think it's a similar thing. So English wines, I think, need more delicate food, in general. So they need raw foods, raw fish, gentle fish dishes.
Hmm.
They struggle a little bit more in those kind of areas where champagne, when you get like a big pinot and with some nice reserve wines and a bit of oak fermentation, and from Aï or from Ambonnay or something in Champagne, we don't really have wines like that in England.
Hmm.
We have some very, very beautiful, delicate Pinot Noirs, and some more power as well in some places. But so when you're talking about richer foods and things, I think England maybe is it's less at home
Hmm.
than some champagnes. So it's just about finding things that don't overwhelm English sparkling wines.
So if I understand this, actually the flavor profile of English sparkling is different. It is unique. It's not necessarily, it may be a wannabe champagne, but it is not champagne. Now, I know that in champagne, we obviously have different flavor profiles. Wine from the Aube, from the Côte des Bar, for instance, is very different. And even in the Côte des Bar, Bar-sur-Seine, Bar-sur-Aube, the areas, the wines are different. Okay. It's not necessarily the same. Same here. Auvillers is almost in the center of things. If I go to the Montagne de Reims, I go to the Côte des Blancs, or I go further in the valley, I will get, I will do 20 kilometers each way if you want. I will get completely different wines. Um, but, so it has its own little unique place.
I think
And
when
there
you
should be enough place for all the wines in
Yeah.
this growing sparkling wine market that we have.
Yeah, I think so. I think England here. It's arrived. It's going to be. It's only going one way. It's only when you look at some regions of the world, I wouldn't mention them, but I think they in a way where they are now with the climate is kind of that's where they're going to be. it's going to be hard to see, growth in quality in some areas. I think England is only going to go one way, really, which is going to be higher and higher quality
Okay.
in the future, I think.
Ooh, that's a okay. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so very much, Tom, for this very interesting comparison between champagne and English wine, English sparkling, and especially to explain, the intricacies of English sparkling, which a lot of people don't know. And also, I think, what was really unique here is because you know champagne so well, you can really, shine a light on both without taking away from one or the other. It's not like winner takes it all. It seems to be that there's space for everybody here. Inclusion, I know DUI is not very fashionable anymore today, but we try to champagne is traditional, so we keep this
Yeah, yeah,
tradition here.
place for
So
both. I love them both, and
okay, no, well, it's great. That's it's great that people have. I think for the consumer, a consumer has never lived in a more exciting sparkling wine market than today because there are alternatives and they can choose different things for different occasions, for different moods. And I think that's great. We have that, for instance, for still Pinot Noir. You can have a Pinot from Oregon, a Pinot from New Zealand, Pinot from South America, a Pinot from obviously Burgundy, but even here in France, Coteau Champenois from Champagne, a Pinot from Alsace, they're
yeah,
going to be very different and they are perfect for whatever occasion we choose them for. So it's nice to know that we have the same for sparkling wine. Thank
agree.
you so much.
All right, thanks, Caroline.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye.
Bye.